Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hi. Blitzkrieg in Southeast Asia, Japan's conquest of Indonesia. History graph. Go.
In December 1941, the same month as Japanese planes infamously attacked Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Japanese Navy and Army was beginning a lightning campaign in Southeast Asia and the East Indies. Over the course of just 3 months, they would overrun almost the entire region in a remarkable string of victories. The campaigns for Southeast Asia and the Dutch East Indies were triggered in July 1941, when the US, UK and Netherlands placed an oil embargo on Japan. Oil was vital to Japan's war economy, and the country had very small amounts of domestic production. In 1939, the Empire of Japan had imported 19.4 million barrels of oil from the US and 14.
You know what's strange? What's strange is that the two countries to start to be the main instigators of the war, being Japan and Germany. Obviously, you have Italy, and I argue to a certain extent Russia, invading Poland with Germany. But, Germany and Japan, and they're the two countries, so they're the two aggressors, and yet they're the two countries that really have oil and resource issues. It's like, Russia, Great Britain, USA, who have these vast amounts of resources. None of them are the attackers.
1.1 million from the Dutch East Indies, compared to just 3.1 million barrels that were extracted domestically. This meant the oil embargo would soon cripple Japan's economy. As Mark Lonstein puts it, for Japan only two choices remained open: to yield to US demands or to acquire the necessary raw materials by force.
Yeah.
As you might be able to guess, Japan chose war, and preparations began for a grand strike south.
I mean, that's absolutely right. Those are your only two options.
As Japan did not have enough shipping to launch simultaneous invasions across the entire region, their planners devised a plan to take the East Indies sequentially. First to be attacked would be Malaya, Borneo and the Philippines. Following this would be an island-hopping campaign concluding with the invasion of the capital of the Dutch East Indies, Java. Key to this plan was a relentless pace and overwhelming firepower from both the air and sea. As such, a large portion of the Japanese fleet was assigned to the Southern Expeditionary Force: 1 light aircraft carrier, 2 battleships, 12 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers and 52 destroyers. Under the overall command of Vice Admiral Nobutake
I'm sorry, guys. I say this all the time, and I get the atrocities. I'm not talking about that. I say this all the time, and I'll still say it. Man, it is impressive. Japan going from the mid-1800s to the mid or early 1900s, like the late 1800s, to just how they are able to organize a Western-style military, navy, in such a short amount of time. It blows my mind, and it is very impressive.
2 battleships, 12 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers and 52 destroyers. Under the overall command of Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo, the Navy would provide close escort and support the invasion convoys as they progressed south. As for a relentless pace, the Japanese wasted no time. By Christmas 1941, large parts of Malaya had fallen, as well as both Kuching and Miri in British Borneo. When the island of Jolo, west of the Philippines, was seized, Japan had the required air bases to cover the first phase of the attacks on the Dutch East Indies. As Japan's fleet carriers were busy elsewhere, capturing air bases suitable for land-based aircraft to use was vital for covering the advance. The Japanese force was large, manned powerful modern ships, and was extensively trained, with the support of a very powerful aviation arm, highly skilled in.
Question, guys. Where did they get all of the training? I know a lot of leaders in Asia went on to kind of learn a bit in Western style nations, but did they have any Western nation direct support in terms of organizing their military? Because I feel like a military tradition for this kind of warfare would take many, many, many generations.
Attacking maritime targets. All things that the opposing Allied force was not and did not have. The Allied naval forces in Southeast Asia in December 1941 were a disparate bunch, representing the differing pre-war priorities and dispositions of 3 navies and 4 nations. After the British capital ships Prince of Wales and Repulse were sunk off the coast of Malaya barely 2 days into the campaign, the largest Allied force in the region was Admiral Thomas Hart's US Asiatic Fleet. The Asiatic Fleet was a small and neglected force, consisting only of the heavy cruisers Houston and Boise, the old light cruiser Marblehead, and 13 Clemson-class destroyers that were
Boise, I think.
Boise, the old light cruiser Marblehead, and 13 Clemson-class destroyers that were commissioned during the First World War. It did have a force of 29 submarines, albeit old ones which were useful, but its only planes were Catalina flying boats, good for reconnaissance but not much use against Japanese fighters. The lack of aviation was a theme in the Royal Navy force in the region too.
Guys, is it actually easier to get off the water with these planes on rough seas? Obviously, it would be more difficult to land, but in terms of taking off, because the swells might provide you with just that jump enough to catch air and fly.
The lack of aviation was a theme in the Royal Navy force in the region too. The aircraft carrier Indomitable had originally been intended to accompany Prince of Wales and Repulse, but had been delayed after striking a coral reef in the West Indies. When it did arrive in January 1942, it and virtually all of Britain's air assets were funneled into Malaya as the campaign there deteriorated. Outside of this, Britain did not have much else in the Far East. Their most powerful remaining ship was the York-class heavy cruiser Exeter, which was supported by the Perth-class light cruisers Perth and Hobart, and 2 old World War I vintage Danae-class light cruisers. The cruisers were joined by a handful of modern destroyers, as well as occasionally a variety of older destroyers and sloops when deployed to escort convoys to Singapore. The third Allied naval power in the Far East was the Royal Netherlands Navy, which mustered 3 cruisers, Tromp, Java and the most modern, De Ruyter. 7 Dutch destroyers were present along with 15 submarines, all of which dated from the mid-1920s. Logistics and resupply were a nightmare for the Dutch as their homeland was occupied by Germany, making obtaining fresh manpower or spares virtually impossible. The situation was so bad that one of the destroyers had no crew and had to wait for one to be sunk so that its crew could be transferred. This ragtag multinational force would be based mostly on Java, variously at Surabaya or Tanjung Priok at either end of the island. Neither of these ports had sufficient anti-air protection, which would become a problem before too long. Insofar as the
One of the things that's crazy is that you'd think maybe Japan might have had even more success if they took more of an approach of, or a goal in mind of freeing Southeast Asia from Western imperialism and acting more as liberators rather than conquerors, but they had this superiority complex, much like the Europeans did, and obviously committed atrocities over there. But they could have been, I wonder if it would have worked out more if they were kind of going into places more as liberating from Europeans rather than Japanese supreme, rule.
The Allied forces had a plan going into 1942. It was to defend the so-called Malay Barrier and keep the Japanese out of the Indian Ocean, and to try and disrupt Japanese landings in the Dutch East Indies wherever possible. Despite the large number of Japanese ships deployed, they did not have enough to escort all the invasion convoys, so it might be possible to pick an undefended one off, even with the meagre forces provided to the Allied commanders. Before too long, the Americans were doing just that. On January 1st, 1942, Admiral Thomas Hart arrived at Java, with his fleet having been relocated in the face of the enemy invasion of the Philippines. On arrival, he was informed that he'd been appointed as the overall commander of Allied naval forces in Southeast Asia, as part of the newly formed American, British, Dutch, Australian Command, a single unified Allied command structure.
Why is MacArthur so far down? And where's Nimitz?
American, British, Dutch, Australian Command, a single unified Allied command structure for the entire region. Admiral Hart soon had his work cut out for him, trying to work within this structure and trying to halt the Japanese advance. On January 10th, a Japanese force under Major General Shizuo Sakaguchi landed at Tarakan in Dutch Borneo, and quickly broke through the single Dutch battalion defending the area. On the same day, Japan landed at Manado, further east, launching the first ever airborne assault in Asia to take the airfield there. With the second line of air bases captured, missions could now be flown further south, lining up Japanese attacks on Makassar, Kendari, and Balikpapan. Meanwhile, the Allies were doing their best to respond to the myriad Japanese landings. Substantial air attacks were launched on the newly captured air bases by US, Dutch, and Australian aircraft, and naval forces prepared to try and disrupt further Japanese landings. Under American Rear Admiral William Glassford, Task Force 5 twice went to sea in mid-January on the basis of faulty intelligence, searching in vain for Japanese invasion convoys near southern Borneo. On January 20th, the cruiser Boys hit an uncharted reef and suffered a 100-foot gouge in her side, forcing the cruiser to be withdrawn from Southeast Asia entirely and Glassford ships to return to port. 2 days later, a Catalina flying boat spotted a Japanese invasion convoy heading south to Balikpapan. Admiral Hart ordered Task Force 5 to engage, but in the intervening days Houston and 2 destroyers had been reassigned to escort a convoy, and Marblehead had developed engine trouble. This left just the 4 destroyers of Commander Paul Talbot's 59th Destroyer Division available, and these ships set off north on January 23rd, covered by poor weather. Marblehead and another destroyer followed behind, intending to be on station to cover Talbot's retreat. In the early hours of January 24th, the 4 destroyers steamed into Balikpapan Bay at high speed. They could spot 14 transports anchored in the bay, silhouetted against the shoreline by oil wells that the retreating Dutch had set ablaze. There were supposed to be 15, but shortly after midnight the Dutch submarine K-18 had sunk the transport Saruga Maru on the southwestern edge of the convoy. Another transport, the Nana Maru, had been bombed by Dutch aircraft and was ablaze, helpfully illuminating the ships around her. The local Japanese commander, Rear Admiral Shoji Nishimura, had taken his flagship, the light cruiser Naka, and destroyers to the west of the convoy to hunt for K-18. This left the eastern approach to the convoy unguarded when Talbot's destroyers arrived on the scene. They quickly got stuck in, sinking 4 Japanese transports over the next hour and damaging others for the cost of just a single shell hit sustained on the USS John D. Ford. It was a victory for the Allies, one of their first at sea against the Empire of Japan. It was, though, a victory which didn't change very much. The Japanese advance pressed on regardless, with Balikpapan secured by January 25th and the airfield at Kendari captured on January 24th. This put the main Allied naval base at Surabaya within range of Japanese bombers, heralding the start of near-daily air attacks. Things soon got worse for the Allies when on February 4th Japanese bombers attacked the Allied striking force while it was attempting to hinder landings at Makassar, damaging Houston and forcing Marblehead to be sent back to the US for repairs. The Japanese march southwards continued unabated. Makassar fell on February 9th and Singapore on February 15th. This marked the final collapse of British Malaya and opened up Sumatra to Japanese attack. No time was wasted. Before Singapore had even officially surrendered, airborne troops were being dropped over Palembang, the southernmost part of Sumatra and home to 2 key Allied air bases and several important oil refineries. The Allied defence held initially, but the following day there was a large supporting amphibious invasion, which overran the remaining Allied troops here by February 16th. With the loss of southern...
Guys, I gotta pee so bad. I'll be right back. I'll wash my hands.
Sumatra, the Netta round 16th. With the loss of southern Sumatra, the net around Java had closed from the west, and just days later, the same happened on the eastern side.
Okay.
In mid-February, 4 Japanese fleet carriers arrived in the Java Sea, launching a devastating air raid against Port Darwin in Australia on February 19th. 188 planes attacked the Australian port, sinking 9 ships in the harbour and destroying many of the facilities, crippling the Allied ability to bring supplies into the Dutch East Indies from this direction. On the same day, Japanese troops landed on the island of Bali, seeking to wrest control of the airfield at Denpasar from the Dutch authorities. The Allies hurled what naval and air forces they had available at the landings, but it was to no avail. Bali was soon controlled by Japan, and 2 Allied ships were lost in the process. The next day it was Timor's turn, as Japanese troops under Colonel Doi Sadashichi overran the island. Both the Dutch and Portuguese controlled parts.
I was going to say Portuguese from Hearts of Iron, I remember.
Amidst this maelstrom, on February 12th, the Allies appointed a new naval commander, Vice Admiral Conrad Helfrich, who was determined to mount whatever resistance he could to defend the last bastion of the Dutch East Indies, Java. Join me in the next episode for the Battle of the Java Sea. Make sure you subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss it.
Coolio. Cool. Awesome. History Graph. Great channel. And I will never cease to be impressed by the rise of Japan. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not talking about, look, I can say I am impressed with the rise of America without having to mention slavery every time. I can say I'm impressed. Just because I say I'm impressed about a certain thing where there are obvious bad things about it, doesn't mean I don't obviously know those things are bad, okay? Great, awesome. See you guys next time. Hope you're doing well. If not, I don't know what I just tried to do there. Chin up. Emotions are fickle. See you next time.